Today in this video, we are going to listen to a short story, The Night Train at Deoli, written by Ruskin. This story was first published in 1988 in one of his collections of short stories titled The Night Train at Deoli and Other Stories. The stories from this collection are mostly set in the hills, places like Mussoorie, Shimla and Dehradun, and they are narrated in the first person. This story, The Night Train at Deoli, is a story of adolescent infatuation presented with great sensitivity. Do you know the meaning of this word infatuation? Well, it is a kind of attraction, a strong, obsessive feeling for someone. Basically, it's different from love in respect of persistence. However, the phase of infatuation might be the beginning of the feeling of love. So, which feeling is there in the story? Just the infatuation or love? One can decide after listening to the complete story. Let's listen to it. When I was at college, I used to spend my summer vacations in Dehra at my grandmother's place. I would leave the plains early in May and return in July. Deoli was a small station about 30 miles from Dehra. It marked the beginning of the heavy jungles of the Indian Tarai. The train would reach Deoli at about 5 in the morning, when the station would be dimly lit with electric bulbs and oil lamps, and the jungle across the railway tracks would just be visible in the faint light of dawn. Deoli had only one platform, an office for the station master and a waiting room. The platform boasted a tea stall, a fruit vendor, and a few stray dogs. Not much else, because the train stopped there only 10 minutes before rushing on into the forest. So the beginning of the story sets the scene, sets the backdrop of Deoli, a small station where the train would briefly halt before entering the heavy jungles of the Indian Tarai belt. And the story begins with the 18-year-old protagonist narrating an incident about one of his regular visits to his grandmother's place during his college vacations. Just notice the beauty of the description by the narrator. He vividly describes the ambience of the small railway station with just one platform that was dimly lit with electric bulbs and oil lamps, and the jungle across the railway tracks would just be visible in the faint light of dawn. But to his surprise, no one ever got down or got into the train here. Now let's listen to the text. Why it stopped at Deoli, I don't know. Nothing ever happened there. Nobody got off the train and nobody got in. There were never any coolies on the platform, but the train would halt there a full 10 minutes and then a bell would sound, the guard would blow his whistle, and presently Deoli would be left behind and forgotten. I used to wonder what happened in Deoli behind the station walls. I always felt sorry for that lonely little platform and for the place that nobody wanted to visit. I decided that one day I would get off the train at Deoli and spend the day there just to please the town. Here, the narrator inquisitively wondered what happened behind the walls of the stations, and he felt so sorry for the little place for which no one apparently cared. He was extremely curious about the place and intrigued by the mysteries that lay beyond it. He wished to explore it someday. For your convenience, I would give you some Hindi translation also wherever it's required. जब मैं कॉलेज में था तब गर्मी की छुट्टियां बिताने के लिए अपनी दादी के पास देहरादून चला जाता था। मैं मई में ही पहाड़ों के करीब चला जाता था और जुलाई के आखिर तक वहीं रहता था। देहरादून से करीब 30 मील दूर एक छोटा सा स्टेशन था, देवली। उस स्टेशन से भारत के तराई वाले घने जंगल शुरू होते थे। गाड़ी सुबह के करीब 5 बजे देवली के स्टेशन पर पहुंचती थी, जब स्टेशन पर बिजली के बल्ब और तेल के लैंप की मध्यम रोशनी रहती थी। सुबह के छुटपुटे की हल्की रोशनी में स्टेशन के पार का जंगल कुछ कुछ नजर आता था। देवली स्टेशन पर एक ही प्लेटफॉर्म था और उसी पर स्टेशन मास्टर का ऑफिस और वेटिंग रूम भी था। प्लेटफॉर्म पर एक चाय की दुकान के अलावा एक फल वाला और कुछ आवारा कुत्तों के अलावा ज्यादा कुछ नहीं था, क्योंकि जंगल की तरफ अपना सफर जारी रखने से पहले गाड़ी वहां 10 मिनट रुकती थी। मगर गाड़ी वहां क्यों रुकती थी, यह मुझे भी नहीं समझ आता था। It is the first part, or we can say introduction or exposition of the plot. स्टोरी के इस फर्स्ट पार्ट में, that's also called exposition, हमें इस स्टोरी की बैकड्रॉप और सेटिंग और कैरेक्टर्स का इंट्रोडक्शन मिलता है। Well, let's move further and read the next part. I was 18, visiting my grandmother, and the night train stopped at Deoli. A girl came down the platform, selling baskets. It was a cold morning, and the girl had a shawl thrown across her shoulders. Her feet were bare, and her clothes were old, but she was a young girl, walking gracefully and with dignity. When she came to my window, she stopped. She saw that I was looking at her intently, but at first she pretended not to notice. She had pale skin, set off by shiny black hair and dark troubled eyes. And then those eyes, searching and eloquent, met mine. She stood by my window for some time, and neither of us said anything. But when she moved on, I found myself leaving my seat and going to the carriage door, and stood waiting on the platform, looking the other way. I walked across to the tea stall. A kettle was boiling over on a small fire, but the owner of the stall was busy serving tea somewhere on the train. The girl followed me behind the stall. "Do you want to buy a basket?" she asked. "They are very strong, made of the finest cane." "No," I said. "I don't want a basket." We stood looking at each other for what seemed a very long time, and she said, "Are you sure you don't want a basket?" "All right, give me one," I said, and I took the one on top and gave her a rupee, hardly daring to touch her fingers. As she was about to speak, the guard blew his whistle. She said something, but it was lost in the clanging of the bell and the hissing of the engine. I had to run back to my compartment. The carriage shuddered and jolted forward. I watched her as the platform slipped away. She was alone on the platform and she didn't move, but she was looking at me and smiling. I watched her until the signal box came in the way, and then the jungle hid the station. But I could still see her, standing there alone. I sat up, awake for the rest of the journey. I could not rid my mind of the picture of the girl's face and her dark, smoldering eyes. In this part of the story, the narrator describes that once he met a young girl selling cane baskets at Deoli station and was fascinated by her charm. She was certainly not clothed ornately, but possessed a graceful gait and a dignified look that captivated the narrator's attention. She had a pale skin, shiny black hair, and dark and expressive eyes. He looked at her intently, and even though she pretended not to notice, their eyes met. They had a very small conversation, and that too was curtailed by the loud noise of the whistle of the train. Somehow the narrator was enamored, was fascinated, was enchanted by her beauty and got off the train to get to the tea stall. There was a mutual attraction between the two, and the girl followed him there and asked him whether he wanted to buy a basket. The narrator, although after some hesitation, bought a basket only not to disappoint the girl and paid her a rupee in return. Their conversation was cut short by the clanging of the bell by the station master, and the narrator had to rush back to his compartment. He watched the girl from his window smiling at him, standing on the platform alone for long. Quite interestingly, this was how the first meeting ended, on a note of interest tinged with gloom, and the cherished moment too seemed to slip away with the platform. The narrator sat awake for the rest of the journey, as he was unable to get rid of the lingering picture of the girl's face and her dark, smoldering eyes standing alone and looking at him. Now let's listen to the Hindi translation of this part of the story. तब मैं 18 वर्ष का था जब अपनी दादी के पास जा रहा था और गाड़ी अंधेरे में देवली पर रुकी। एक लड़की प्लेटफॉर्म पर टोकरियां बेचती हुई आई जब तक उजाला नहीं हुआ था और खूब सर्दी थी। लड़की ने कंधों पर एक शॉल डाल रखा था। वह नंगे पैर थी और उसके कपड़े भी पुराने थे, लेकिन वह छोटी सी उम्र की लड़की बड़ों जैसी सधी चाल से चल रही थी। मेरी खिड़की पर आकर वह रुक गई। उसने देखा मैं उसी को ध्यान से देख रहा हूँ, लेकिन पहले उसने अनजान बनने की कोशिश और फिर उसकी खोई खोई और बोलती सी आंखें मेरी आंखों से टकराई. This part of the story or the plot of the story is the rising action. Here we notice that the boy who is the narrator meets a young girl, though she is poor, but she has a charm in her personality, and the narrator is attracted towards her and he feels a kind of infatuation, though he feels that that was the feeling of love. But we cannot decide it yet that was it love or infatuation, as we discussed in the beginning of this lesson. So, in this part of the story, we can see the clear and candid expression of the feelings, emotions, and sentiments of an adolescent boy towards an unknown girl. Stay tuned for the climax and concluding part of this story. Thank you for joining. Happy learning.